Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of Easy Conversations, a podcast about having easy conversations. I'm your host, Birk Gundersen. In this week's episode, I sit down with Birk Gundersen. Birk shares his story about his lifelong battle with anxiety and depression. Birk talks about the onset of anxiety in his life and how it's been a constant struggle for him. He also talks about the struggle he has between anxious and depressive symptoms and the work he's been doing to continue to battle through the symptoms. Birk also talks about some of the tips and tools that have worked for him over the years. I hope you can get a lot out of this episode, and if at the end you could leave a 5-star review, I would truly appreciate it. Well, Birk, I appreciate you taking the time today and joining the podcast. Super grateful for coming on here and sharing your story. So before we get started, I just wanted to give you an opportunity to introduce yourself, where you're located, and then we'll kind of get into your story.
Yeah, sounds great. Happy to be here. Appreciate the opportunity. So my name is Birk Gundersen, and I'm based out of Utah in the United States. And, I've had a lot of experiences over, most of my adult life with anxiety and depression. And, I'm a nursing student right now, and I study a lot of this stuff. And, my purpose is kind of to help people be informed and to, understand their condition, and also do it in a way that's, from somebody who's been there and who's, been through a lot of the similar things that people go through. And, I started this thing called the Anxious Resistance, which is my kind of media group. And, I do it with some friends right now, and we just try to help people be inspired and educated and help them overcome their difficulties.
Yeah, no, thanks for sharing that. And I guess from the perspective of being a nursing student, and like recently I've been reading a lot about compassion fatigue, in the sense where, being in that field, you often, through empathy or just through the distress of your patients, you often take on some of their own distress, or whether it's or compassion fatigue, which can often lead to burnout. Is that something you've also experienced?
It is. The nursing field is a pretty difficult one, and it's pretty apparent that there's a lot of issues right now, especially with the pandemic going on, of nurses being overworked and not getting the self-care time that they need. And I have experienced that myself. I'm not currently working while I'm in nursing school full time, but I have worked in the field for years. And yeah, that's a true thing, that compassion fatigue. Sometimes nurses have to step away, and this happens a lot. They have to step away from the field for a while because they just have given so much of themselves that they don't have a whole lot left to give. So that's definitely true. And, it hasn't really been a huge part of my experience with anxiety and depression. But I do see people that affects a lot.
Yeah. So I guess touching on like the anxiety and depression, like, when do you think, you started experiencing it, and how long did it take you to realize like what it actually was?
So that's actually a pretty interesting story. So the first time I had an issue really was when I was 17. So I was a junior in high school, and I was having some issues with like my friend group. I talk about this a lot in my videos, but what happened was people were kind of just going their separate ways, like a lot of people do in high school, and I was just having a lot of issues and feeling like I was being left behind. And it all started this one day. I remember I was up late. Actually, no, sorry, I wasn't up late. That was a different part of the story. But
Mm-hmm.
I remember I was home from school. I was home from school sick one day. And this is when cell phones were a thing. And I'm like sitting there. I'm like, nobody's texted me today. Nobody's been like, hey, where you at? We noticed you weren't at school and all this stuff. And that honestly is kind of what triggered it for me. Was I started to feel like maybe nobody noticed, maybe nobody cared. Um, which looking back on it, I don't really think was true, but in my
Mm-hmm.
mind, that's how I felt at the time.
Mm-hmm.
And that triggered this anxiety that built up over the next week or so. And it turned into just like this full-blown panic that lasted for 3 months. I didn't eat, I didn't sleep, I had to drop out of classes at school.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but as far as like understanding what was happening to me, I think I would, at first I thought I was losing my mind. I thought I was going crazy. I couldn't focus on anything. And it was such a struggle
Mm-hmm.
to just get anything productive done. And, like I said, I wasn't sleeping, I wasn't eating. Um, and it really killed me. And I did end up seeing a therapist. Luckily, my parents had both worked actually in the psychiatric field and had some connections. They hadn't
Mm-hmm.
worked there in a long time, but still knew some people, and got me in pretty quick to see somebody, which I know a lot of people have to wait a long time. So I was very lucky that happened, and started to kind of understand what was going on, that this was anxiety, that this was, panic that I was dealing with,
Mm-hmm.
and not that I was, losing my mind, but there were times where I was just so in my own world that I thought I was, disassociating from reality
Mm-hmm.
even. So
Mm-hmm.
it was pretty wild.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think, I mean, obviously, like it must be tough because, there's been times during this pandemic where you're kind of in lockdown, sitting at home alone, and everyone's kind of like at home and you don't hear from people. There's nowhere to go. Excuse me. And that also, I think, can create feelings of anxiety and potentially depression, right? So I think for people that have experienced that, just being mindful of it rather than just tucking it away and not thinking it's a big deal, because those are some of the feelings that can arise.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think there are a lot of circumstances where people just kind of, tuck those feelings away and don't recognize them, don't allow themselves to feel it,
Mm-hmm.
and it just makes it worse over time. And honestly, back to my, original experience, that's probably a lot of what happened to me. Was, I had all these feelings of, being left behind, of you know, of feeling like maybe nobody cared and all this stuff. And I think it'd probably been going on for a little while. And I never understood it enough to express it or to talk about it. Um, and that's probably what led to, my full blown panic that lasted for so long. And so, yeah, I like what you're saying. It's funny though, because the pandemic in a lot of ways has been actually kind of good for my mental health, because I feel like the pressure's off a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I don't feel like I have to be going out every weekend and, hanging out with people, and,
Mm-hmm.
like that social pressure's off a little bit. So it's kind of funny, because I think there are a few people in my boat, and that's not to say that those that are struggling,
Mm-hmm.
not to unvalidate them, but for me, it actually has kind of been good, because that pressure is off, which is funny, because then you think, well, maybe a lot of it has to do with the pressure we put on ourselves, and that society puts on us to do those things. So
Yeah, for sure. And I think part of it is also dependent on your personality type, right? If you're an introvert versus an extrovert, And I guess when for extroverted people, they get a lot of their energy by being around others. So when that's
Right.
taken away, they just probably feel like something's missing. And I'm kind of somewhere in between. So I need my time of socialization. And when that's not available, it does feel hard for me at times. But there's other times where I just appreciate just being at home and getting my own time, and that introvert part of me where I can just regain myself, ground myself, just being at home, and not have to like be around others. And it depends on the type of energies you surround yourself with too. Obviously, there's negative energy doesn't help either. So yeah, no, I think that's an important point too, where many people are feeling less pressure because of the pandemic. I guess in your case, so going back to like, you were able to like, at least through your parents, able to get therapy probably early on, I guess, compared to most other people who may not even know what's going on. Like, how did the therapy help? Was it able to identify what it was you were going through, or you already kind of had an idea that whatever it is, it's associated with anxiety?
So the therapy was really key. Um, and and I went during this 3-month, 4-month period. Excuse me. Um, and it really helped me recognize, what was going on, because, I can express to you now that the feelings that I had at the time.
Mhm.
And back then, I don't think I could have I could have done that, because I hadn't talked about it. I hadn't explored, the feelings that I was having. And therapy was huge for that. And the therapy was also huge to understand, the physiological things that were going on, that, my heart rate's really high because I'm anxious. I can't sleep because I'm anxious. I'm nauseous, so I'm not eating because of the anxiety. And understanding that your body can do that.
Mhm.
And I had to start some medications at the time. I had to take some stuff to help me sleep at night. So not only was I seeing a therapist, I was seeing a physician as well. So um, yeah.
Yeah, yeah. And then I guess, did it help putting a label to it, like in terms of like knowing what it was and being able to like talk about it, saying, hey, I'm dealing with anxiety, and this is a struggle, but at least like I'm trying to work through it and figure it out.
Yeah, definitely. And it was funny because I've always been pretty good about like talking about it. I think once I kind of realized what was going on, I wasn't afraid to tell people that, hey, this is, why I seem kind of despondent, or like I'm not listening to you. It's because I'm, so anxious in my mind that I'm having a hard time following what was going on. And I would tell people that. And it was pretty incredible how many other people would come forward and be like, hey, I deal with something similar. I have a friend who's like, oh, I deal with some OCD. And I'd have another friend who's, I deal with some ADHD, and other friends who, I have some bipolar
Mhm.
and take medication for that. And I was always surprised how many people would come forward and say, I struggle with something similar. And that was a big help to me, to feel
Mhm.
like that I wasn't alone. And even other people who, struggled with anxiety and depression and stuff. And that was always pretty incredible.
Mhm. Mhm. And then like, when were you able to feel that you kind of had a better handle on it, and what were some of the things you were doing actively to kind of mitigate those feelings, right? So I know you mentioned medication and stuff like that, but were you doing some active stuff to like reduce the likelihood of those feelings coming up?
Yeah, I think I definitely learned to realize like some thought patterns that would lead down that road. When I would overgeneralize things, and something bad would happen, or maybe I wasn't getting along as well as I was hoping to with somebody that day, that all of a sudden I generalized it to everybody. Oh, nobody likes me, nobody wants to do anything with me, and which just wasn't true. So I had to recognize that thought pattern. And another thing was, with the anxiety, I felt like I had to take on everything all at once,
Mm-hmm.
rather than, just do what you got to do today, then do what you got to do tomorrow, take it a day at a time. I had to, really learn to do that. And I still have to do that, all the time. And, kind of know what your limitations are as well.
Mm-hmm.
That's a big thing that I have to do, because I tend to be the kind of person that likes to, have a full calendar and, have stuff going on. But I have to understand that, I got to take some time for myself, and I got to take some time to say no, that I can't do this now. It's going to have to wait.
Mm-hmm.
And prioritizing as well. Some things are definitely more important to get done than others. And just like learning what those things are, what you can put off, until later, deal with another time when you're less busy,
Mm-hmm.
rather than feeling like you have to do everything all at once.
Yeah, no, I think that's really important to kind of slow things down and pause. And we were talking about the pandemic earlier, and personally for me, with the lockdowns and things being shut down, it allowed me to like slow things down and just pause, right, and not be on the go all the time. So I think in that from that perspective, it was positive in the sense where it really allowed me to like just focus on the small things and prioritize those and appreciate those little things, because often I kept myself so busy with just being out all the time and doing stuff, whether it was playing sports, going to the gym, hanging out with friends, and just that finding that little time of just stillness, as I call it, was so important, because you're able to actually deal with some of the thoughts that are going on in your head rather than avoiding them. So
Yeah.
I think that's kind of stuff you're talking about. I guess, you know, we've touched on anxiety a little bit, and, often if you look at depression, like if anxiety, almost like that's kind of uh, the early stages. And if it's not dealt with, often it can lead to depression. Was that the case for you, or you were able to deal with it a lot sooner, that it didn't get to that point, or there were often times where things got progressively worse, and then you did feel depression at times, but it wasn't as bad?
So yeah, that's definitely, what happened to me. We've talked about that first kind of incident that I had that lasted for 3 or 4 months. Um, Luckily, it was kind of like at the end of the school year. I crashed a little bit in the summer,
Mm-hmm.
um, but I was young, and I think I kind of bounced back fairly quickly. Um, but I'd been dealing I've been dealing with this now for 10 years, and I've had times where it started with that panic. Um, you know, After I had graduated from high school, I had kind of a relapse and had that same panic again for several months. And, you know, it was so bad that it turned to depression, right after, because your body just can't handle that anxious state for that long.
Mm-hmm.
I think when I was young, I probably handled it even longer than I could now. But um, I hit that phase where I crashed, and I was still like feeling anxious inside, but I couldn't be anxious anymore because my body couldn't do it, and so I was depressed. And then the sadness came. I started sleeping a lot, and I still, I was tired all the time, but I was still anxious, so I still wasn't sleeping like well. So it's not like I was getting well rested.
Mm-hmm.
um and it just kind of it just kind of got worse. And usually, depending on how bad the anxiety was, determines how bad the depression crash would be for me as well.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but but it's recognizing that the two are tied together, right? It's just two different reactions to the same sort of stressor, the same sort of emotional strain that's bothering you.
Mm-hmm.
But what was nice is, at least in the depressive state, I could follow conversations, and so I think counseling was a little bit more effective for me when I was depressed versus anxious. And physiologically, the two are so tied together. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
almost always, if you have one, you have the other.
Mm-hmm.
And that would be the reason why, is because your body can't handle the anxiety for so long, and some people just tend to go to the depression first.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So but the same feelings lead to either of them.
Right.
And
Right.
so, you have to learn to address what the real problem is, what's really bothering you,
Mm-hmm.
and get past, the symptoms. And a lot of times it takes medication to help get you there, because there's biological factors
Mm-hmm.
that are just, almost completely out of your control to overcome, without a little bit of help.
Mm-hmm.
And that's been my case. I've been on Prozac for, um, maybe it's been 4 or 5 years now, and that one's helped me a lot. And other things that I do that I talk about on my channel that have really helped me from that physiological standpoint. And but you got to have both. I mean, you got to have the therapy too, or else you probably just relapse. I mean, they're both skills, or techniques that you have to help you live your best life.
Yeah. Yeah. No, for sure. Thanks for sharing that. I think, I mean, the triggering feelings are the same for both anxiety and depression. And I guess, uh, I mean, your thought patterns do kind of change from what I've understood. Like, with anxiety, like you said, it's the feelings of panic and the constant worry. Whereas depression, it's almost on the side of just not feeling motivated enough, right? Like it's sleeping, not being able to get out of bed, just not feeling like doing anything, not talking to people, not wanting to be around others. So it's just being aware of some of those symptoms, with the two. Um, and just being mindful of it, and like you said, sometimes medication is needed, and sometimes you can do things actively, whether it's therapy. I know a lot of people, like through mindfulness, whether it's meditation, yoga, walking, journaling, a lot of that also helps people. Are those some of practices you've adopted over the last few years? And if so, have they helped, uh, with your journey?
Yeah, definitely. There are some. I know, when I get in depressive states, um, I haven't done this in a while, but in my journal, I would always write, things that I was grateful for, and things in life that were good. And I think one of the biggest things that helped me was remembering, what I lived for, the people that I loved and cared about, and felt the same about me.
Mm-hmm.
And I would remember those things. Another thing that I had to do, when this first started is, I think people are sensitive to different things. And for me, like, I'm pretty sensitive to, like, music.
Mm-hmm.
Music makes me feel, however the music is. Sometimes it's sad or angry, or just upbeat. But I tend to feel those feelings pretty fully when I'm listening to music. And what I had to do is, there were some self-destructive things I would listen to back in the day, and I had to eliminate those from things that I was listening to, and that was a big help for me, to focus on the positive instead of the negative. Um, but that's also not to discount that sometimes you do need to feel a little sad for a little bit,
Hmm.
and that's healthy.
Hmm.
Sometimes, you know, I'll listen to a song that's kind of angry just because I feel angry and I kind of need to express that a little bit. Um, but that was a big thing for me to change, what I was listening to. Um, but yeah, exercise has helped me a lot in recent years. It didn't really help me when things were really bad in the beginning,
Hmm.
just because I was so dysfunctional that um, I just couldn't get there. And um, it was interesting because when I was depressed and I'd go exercise, what would happen actually is I would just get anxious afterward, because I would, I'd have some serotonin again,
Yeah.
and I'd feel good. I got some endorphins flowing, but then that just allowed me to be anxious again, and and I would just burn it off and end up, back where I was before. So it almost seemed kind of pointless.
Hmm.
Especially since, like I kind of mentioned, I actually kind of preferred the depressive state over the anxious state. Um, so I didn't like the exercise would put me back into kind of an anxious state. But in recent years, the exercise has really helped me a lot, and I think exercise is so key to changing, how you think, because it allows that neuroplasticity to happen, and when you exercise, you learn better, and your thoughts change faster, and you're able to adapt more. And maybe that's part of why I had such an issue when I was younger. I didn't exercise a lot, in high
Hmm.
school. Maybe that's because I was so busy with studies and things anyway, but I didn't make time for something like that. Um, so that's something that I've definitely come to realize has been a big help for me. But I also understand that sometimes exercise is not necessarily a help. I think you have to be at a certain level of functionality before it really helps.
Yeah. Yeah. No, and I think that's something important you've highlighted, because being aware of whether or not something's helping, and just because people kind of tend to recommend exercise because it's worked for them, or kind of like it's the go-to thing, being aware of how it impacts you, right? And I guess for you, there was a point where the exercise was making you more anxious while it was helping with the depression, but for you it wasn't, uh, at that point in your life, it wasn't the best thing to be anxious. So that's an important thing to highlight, being aware of what helps and what doesn't help, and knowing what you're feeling rather than what other people are recommending. So just being mindful of that, and I guess doing the things that actually make you feel better. And for everyone, there's different methods and practices that help, and there are certain things that don't work. So keeping that in mind. And I guess one of the other things you touched on briefly was the music, and I want to kind of highlight that is, we tend to, whether it's music or the type of movies or TV shows we watch, or even like um, the people we surround ourselves with. And if there's a certain negativity associated with that, you're gonna, especially if you're sensitive, and at that point where you're feeling anxious, and you're bound to feel things more, and by surrounding yourselves self with something like that, you're gonna take on those feelings, right? So the point I'm trying to make is, be aware of even the people you surround yourself with, right? So if there's a certain sense of negativity and you're feeling a little bit more sensitive, you're going to feel that negativity as well and carry it with you. So just being mindful of what you need and what kind of energy you need. And it's not always easy to kind of go find positivity, whether it's with people or just outside, but just trying to surround yourself with that kind of energy, because it can help with whatever you're struggling with.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. And you know, you touched on, media, music, and friends, and all these things are so important. And I had to make some adjustments as well to, the people that I was around.
Mm-hmm.
And I'd say that was the hardest adjustment, just because early on, when it all started, my all my struggles kind of involved the people around me.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but later in life now, I'm finally at a point where I'm secure enough that I can say, "Hey, I don't need you in my life."
Mm-hmm.
And if you tend to bring this negativity that just brings me down, then I'm okay with letting it go. And I think back then I wasn't okay with letting it go. Like, I felt like I had to have that connection with, everybody or whatever. But now I feel like, if there isn't some give and take in a relationship, say that's my tendency, is to be all give and somebody else be the all take.
Mm-hmm.
I'm okay with letting those things go now, and letting those relationships not be a part of my life. Sorry,
Mm-hmm.
my but it's funny. I thought of this when you mentioned, like, the media you watch, TV shows, movies. It was kind of interesting when I hit the depressive state. There was actually a show that I watched that I felt like helped me a lot. Um, and it may even sound kind of counterintuitive, those that have seen it before, but I watched a lot of House MD. I don't know if you've
Yeah, yeah,
seen it before.
yeah.
Um, but there's a lot of a struggle in the show. That's part of why I love it, because it really shows this humanity side of things, and the, like, the true human condition,
Mm-hmm.
and that people suffer, and that life's difficult, and it's hard, but also kind of about, like, getting through that, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
um and finding some meaning in it, whether you're religious or not, or whatever. But that helped me, because I felt like when I watched that show, that, like, I wasn't alone, that, like, there are other people struggling.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not always mental health either. It's, sometimes it's physical.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes it's even financial, sometimes it's addictions. And but I just felt so much better, and I still love that show to this day.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just like my go-to to watch, especially if, I'm kind of feeling down, because it's got good humor in it as well, sometimes bordering on the inappropriate side of things. But it just always made me feel better.
Mm-hmm.
And you know I don't think that's going to be the case for everybody when they watch it, but for me, it really was, and I still go to that show.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah. Yeah, no, I think it's important to, because you did mention from the perspective of the show, uh, the resiliency aspect, right? And I think that is something very important, because every, like you said, everyone's struggle is different. It could be mental health, it could be financial, it could be uh, physical health. But at the end of the day, the way to get through it is through being resilient, and that could look different for everyone too. So I think what you touched on is very important, in the sense that being able to identify with that resiliency, and telling yourself that only I can get through this, and it's my job to find a way. And you could take your time through it, and there's no prescribed method or journey. Everyone's journey is different. So But as long as you're focused on that resiliency, that's important. And one of the things I wanted to touch on, like when we're talking about surrounding ourselves with the right kind of energies, it doesn't mean that we avoid whatever we're feeling, right? So I know you talked about when you would listen to that music, it was because you were feeling sad or you were feeling angry. And it's being able to recognize those feelings, put a name to them, and not avoid them, but yeah, like identify those feelings and find a way to work through them. So I just wanted to highlight that, when I say surround yourself with those kinds of energies, whether it's through media or people, uh, it doesn't mean that you're avoiding those feelings. It means that you're identifying them and then finding a way to work through them.
Yeah, definitely. And that's still something that I find myself expressing to other people a lot. If I'm having a rough day and I seem a little down or something, um, family will be like, "Oh, well, don't feel sad. Don't worry about it." And usually I kind of shoot back with, "Well, it's okay for me to feel this way for a little while." I'm like, I had a pretty rough day on
Mm-hmm.
Tuesday this week. I
Mm-hmm.
think it was the day I had to reschedule with you.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but I was just having a rough day. A lot of things really fell through for me that day, and I had to tell my family. I said, "Hey, I'm allowed to feel sad about this for a little bit." Um, and I said, if I don't let myself feel this way for a little while and work through this feeling, then I said, I'm going to be angry for weeks. I'm going to be upset. I said, it's just going to build if I just ignore it.
Mm-hmm.
So I just need to feel this way for a little while, and that's okay. And that's healthy,
Mm-hmm.
because I think too often our intention in society is to just like, it's not okay to feel this way. Like, you need to not feel sad. You need to not feel anxious or worried,
Mm-hmm.
um, because it's not good. But the reality is actually the opposite. You need to let yourself feel that way and work through it, like you say, to come out the other end, or else you're going to have a real problem at some point.
Mm-hmm.
You're
Mm-hmm.
going to have some serious, anxiety, depression over whatever it is, unless you work through it.
Yeah.
So that's something that I have to point out to people a lot. It's just, hey, let me work through this. I'll be okay. It might take a day or two of me feeling down, but I'll be fine, and I'll
Mm-hmm.
be better than if I ignored it.
Right, right. And by ignoring it, it often comes out in different ways, right? And I think, like you said, in society, the tendency is, hey, you're having a bad day, let's go for a drink, or even people themselves saying, oh, I need a drink, and that's just numbing the pain and avoiding it rather than actually facing it and sitting in it, and working through it, right? And I mean, you can avoid it for a little bit, but if you just kind of tuck it away and not come back to it, like you said, it's going to show up in different ways, and it could be often worse and
Yeah.
unhealthy. So I think it's important to make that distinction. I guess we've touched on a lot here, and it, at the end of the day, if you wanted to like share some tools or things that have worked for you and for others that may be struggling in a similar way, whether it's anxiety or depression, and if they're in the early stages or kind of in the latter stages or somewhere in between, what are some things you could share, for people?
Um, Kind of hard to nail it down to one thing. But I think one of the biggest things for me has been faith. I'm a pretty religious person,
Mm-hmm.
and that really helped me through a lot of difficulty. even, when things seem totally hopeless, at times when I even was suicidal, I always held on to this hope that there's things that are going to get better.
Mhm.
And part of what I did too is educated myself too. I looked at, this is what the treatments are, this is what the options are for me. I mentioned it, I tried 15 different medications before I finally found one that worked, because I went from like SSRIs all the way around the whole circle, and had a lot of bad side effects with a lot of things, but just holding on to things will get better. There's so many different ways that these things can be treated. It's not a one pill answer for everybody, that's for sure. I mean,
Mhm.
everybody's different, but there's so much hope, and there's so many ways that you can work through this. And I'd always get down because my parents would tell me, they'd say, hey, you'll get through this, but it may take a while, it may
Mhm.
take years. They'd be like, our neighbor down the street really struggled for years, but she made it through and she's okay. And sometimes I didn't like to hear that. I'm like, I don't want to wait years for this.
Mhm.
I'm really suffering, I feel like. And but just remember that there is hope. It may take some time, but also, like, there's so many things that I learned through it all, about the important things in life. And so remember to take the time to learn those things. um, Time spent being depressed and anxious is hard and difficult, but it's not wasted time,
Mhm.
if that makes sense.
Mhm.
um, because you learn to be resilient, you learn to work through difficult, hard things, um, and then you get out on the other side. And I just want people to imagine, those who are struggling, imagine getting back to your baseline, back to normal. But now you're back to baseline and normal with all the skills that you've learned to handle challenges and struggles in life. And now you can apply that to everything that happens to you for the rest of your life.
Mhm.
Um, and so the time is not wasted. There are options, there are treatments. Um, Learn about them, have hope in that. And that's part of what I like to do, is tell people about these treatments and things that you can do to get better.
Mhm.
And there's certainly not one answer, but there is one for you. And I am sure of that, because I was that guy who thought for years that I'm going to be the one who doesn't make it through. I'm going to be the one who is like this the rest of their life. And here I am, not just surviving, but thriving because of the experiences that I went through.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah, and I think it it's important to note that, right? Like the experiences are what allow us to grow and where we learn the most. Um, and it's okay to have setbacks, right? And like you said, even a few days ago, you had a day where it was tough, and that is normal too. And not to be discouraged when days like that come up.
Yeah, definitely. You just keep going. Things will get better.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Well, Burke, I want to thank you again for coming on here, sharing your story, being vulnerable enough to talk through some of the challenges you've had to go through, but also the journey you've been on and the work you've been doing. So thank you so much for doing that. I guess for people, I know you mentioned your page, but if people want to get a hold of you, what is the best way to do that?
So the best way to probably to get a hold of me would be through our website, theanxiousresistance.com. You can go there and you can sign up for the email list. but also our Facebook and Instagram page are also great ways to get a hold of me. And there's lots of content there in all those places for people to look at and hopefully find something that is beneficial to them. Yeah, but if people have questions, if people want to know more about my experience, go ahead and shoot me a message on social media or find my email on the website.
Okay, awesome. Well, thanks again. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, I appreciate the chance to talk about this, because honestly, it still helps to even talk about it today and express feelings, even if it was years ago. So thanks for the opportunity. I wish you all the luck too, and I hope everybody, finds something beneficial in what we've talked about today.
Well, that's the end of the episode. Thank you again for tuning in and showing your support. Until next week.